very figurative and very elaborate. It's not minimalistic at all. But there is something about clay and glazing here that is very rich that I loved.
Adriana,
So,
give me,
yes.
I think we had a couple questions for the first part of your talk. Can we sneak those in and then continue?
Yes, absolutely. I'm sorry. Let me go back.
Okay, just two quick ones, really. The first one was, how thick are the walls of the blades? The like the brown one with the purple edge. Like, how thick was that?
No, I'm sorry. I'm going back.
It's okay. Sorry. You don't need to go back. You know which one we mean. Wait.
Let me. Oh gosh, I got lost. Let me stop sharing. Let me escape. And let me go back to that piece. You mean this one or the plate?
The one with the purple edge.
Okay.
Joanne's talking about.
Play. And let me escape again and let me share again. Hold on. I'll get there.
Okay. Yep, that's the one, I believe.
Okay. So how thick? I don't remember. I think I was building this not even with coils. I was just getting chunks of clay and sticking it in there. And so maybe an inch or less, an inch, I would say.
Okay.
Or less than an inch.
And the ones you were showing towards the end, how many times were you firing those typically, with layers and layers?
Okay, let me move this. The last picture, this one. So this was fired first.
And it was sorry, go ahead.
No, first bisque, and after the bisque, I put the oxide, the 2 layers of glaze. I fired the glaze firing to count 6. This is something I forgot, that all the pieces were fired to count 6, and then I took it out of the kiln, and then I applied the casting slip, which was this. It was from Amaco for Cone 5 casting slip, and I apply that on top of the already fired pieces, and then I let it dry and fire again to Cone 6.
Got it.
Okay.
Great, thank you.
All right. Okay, so these were the first tiles that I made in my studio, and I was inspired by the rich iconography of the Taj Mahal. So this is inspired by 2 doors and windows at the Taj Mahal. And as you can see, they are very rich, and it took me about 2 years again. So this was another period in my life that I sat down and I tested glazes like crazy. And so it took me 2 years to develop the design, to carve the design, make the molds, make the different sizes, and develop the glazes that I was going to use with these tiles. So this was a glossy brown, and some of these glazes I still use today. So I use glazes that the glaze from Bezalel, the glaze from University of Miami, and the glazes that I developed in this period. And what I wanted the glazes to do was either to highlight the surface or to blur the surface. So you see in the tile that is on the right, it's a beautiful way in which the glaze, how it breaks into the different details of the surface. And in the one on the left, the glaze is blurring the stars that they have underneath. So the glaze on the right is a barium matte from Valcushing, and in this case has 4 grams of copper to make it blue. And the one on the left is a very glossy, very, very runny glaze that cracks beautifully. And in this case, it has rutil, and that's what is creating the crystals. So this is the same tile that I was showing you before. You see the Taj Mahal on the left is again this tile with the glossy glaze that I call SG. The recipe came from a book, and it has a lot of rutile. And so here, the same glaze completely blurs the design or highlights the design. So during that period, I was also teaching tile making at the Maryland College of Art and Design, which doesn't exist anymore. But two of my students, called John and Lynn, told me that I should show my work at the Tile Heritage Foundation sale that was taking place at in Doylestown, Pennsylvania, at the Moravian Tile Pottery. The Moravian Tile Pottery, if you haven't been there, is a trip that I highly recommend. It's a day trip. It was founded by Henry Chapman Mercer and in the year 1901. 1901 or 1910, beginning of the century. And this is his house, his castle, and next to his house there is also the factory where he would manufacture tiles. And what is interesting is that the factory still makes the original tiles that he designed with local clay, and the house itself is completely decorated with tiles. There is not 1 inch that is not covered with the tiles. So it's crazy and it's worthwhile visiting. So anyway, back to the art fair. So I did show my tiles at the Moravian Tile Show organized by the Tile Heritage. And it was the first time that I was approached by Urban Archaeology. Urban Archaeology is a store in New York that has locations also in Chicago. And the owners, Judith Stockman and her husband, started this store selling antique hardware. And then at the time they saw my tiles, that was the time that they wanted to expand, also to include tiles in their collection. So I worked with them all the time that I sold tiles. It was mostly through them, and they had beautiful collection of other tile makers. So it was really nice to be a part of their store. And so it was, I think, I was at the right place at the right time. I just was in Doylestown at the time that Judy Stockman was looking for tile makers, and she saw my work. So this is a page of the website that I had at the time, and you can see this is a swimming pool that was done in Rhode Island in Newport. And you can see on the top, I don't know if you can see well, but there is a turquoise band, and that has the crackle glossy glaze that I told you about. And here you can see how glossy and how much the glaze cracks. And that's, I think, quite beautiful. On the left, there is a band of a metallic tile. So this is the bronze glaze with gold luster on top. And in the bottom, you see the two tiles that were used for this swimming pool. And they are both with the Valcushing barium glaze that has a 4% of copper and 2% of titanium, and that makes it turquoise instead of blue. When I started making the tiles, a great help was the book of Frank Giorgini. I had an idea of how to make tiles, but this book gave me a great framework for how to follow steps, and he is very specific, and I highly recommend his book if you ever want to make tiles. But the difference with the way Giorgini was making his tiles, you see in the picture in the bottom, you can see that he did the prototype, the original tile, in clay. He would carve a clay tile. And that's not great, because you use the tile to make a mold, like in the picture on the left, right? You see a plaster being cast on top of the tile to create a mold. And once you make that mold, you have to throw away the prototype. And you can press clay into that mold and use that mold as your master mold. And then from that, you make many clay tiles that you make your many pressing molds, but the process is very complicated. And you can mess up with the different tiles can have different shrinkage. So I knew I wanted to make my prototypes with rubber. So I'm going to take a tour now of my story, and I'm going to show you how I did the rubber prototypes. So any questions so far, Jan?
There was just one question, which is, what is the clay body you were using for your tiles?
Great question. That was another thing that I was testing when I was in this period of 2 years. I used the porcelain number 213 from Standard Supply. And I use that because it's a very smooth clay. It fires cone 6 and it's a nice, it's not exactly a porcelain. It's called porcelain, but it's not. It's a white clay body. But the color response in a white background was very important to me. Using stoneware, it's easier, the tiles deform less, but it's like painting on brown paper. Okay, all right. Shall I continue? Any more questions so far? All right. Okay, so here you have me doing a block of plaster. So to make the rubber, the best way is to create first a block of plaster that I'm going to carve with the design. So I made here a box, and then, sorry, I seal the edges. You see that all the edges are sealed, and the bottom has a soap, so the plaster doesn't stick. And here is how I mix the plaster. I use what is called the island method, which is not very precise. I don't measure the plaster when I do press molds. And so you just put a plaster in the water until you see what is called an island. And then when that island gets completely wet, that's when you start mixing with your hand, because you have to feel the plaster. And after a minute, you pour the plaster into your box. The plaster block is about 1 inch thick. And this is my plaster block after drying. It has to be completely dry for you to be able to transfer a design. On the right, you can see this design that I am about to transfer to this plaster block. And the reason I am doing all of this is because I'm going to do the carving on plaster. When you carve on plaster, you get much more precise design, much precise carving than if you are carving on clay. Probably if you have that experience in clay, it's much harder to get the absolute finest detail that easy to get when you're carving plaster. So I put the paper face down. So this is a photocopy of a design that I did in Kinko's. The ink from all printers works the best. Sometimes the ink from probably the copier that you have in your house may not work, but you have to know that from Kinko's, the copier from Kinko's has ink that will translate to the plaster. So I put the paper face down and I wrap the back with a lot of acetone, layer and upon layer, and I rub and rub until I'm satisfied with how the design was transferred to the plaster block. And you can see that on the right. And these are some of the tools that I use to carve the surface. You can see on the picture on the left that I began to carve a little bit of the flower. You can use mini chisels or needles or an X-Acto knife or whatever tool you find comfortable. The thing with tools is when you will develop your favorite tools as you go, and you'll find your own. So these